The air in the Segoville camp was thick and wet, a Texas summer that pressed the oxygen out of the lungs. It was late, hours after taps, but the heat still hung heavy over the aluminum barracks. Private First Class Tom Hayes walked the perimeter, his boots crunching on the dried gravel. He was tired, jumpy, and every shadow looked like a movement in the jungle he'd left behind in the Pacific. He stopped near the row of women's barracks. The propaganda posters in the mess hall promised him these prisoners were fanatical zealots, the enemy he had lost his brother to. But the reality staring at him through the chain link was just stillness and the sound of coughing. A harsh, wet cough echoed from the N building. He knew that sound. It wasn't the sound of an enemy soldier. It was the sound of his mother during a bad winter. Tom frowned, tightening his grip on the rifle. He was assigned to Segoville to watch them, not to worry about them. Another cough, followed by a faint whimper. A nurse, he remembered the roster, Harada Yoko. Her file listed her as a captured army nurse. She had probably seen things far worse than this prison, but the sound was raw, stripped of all rank and training. He reached into his utility belt, not for a clip or a flare, but for a small wrapped bar. It was a block of cheap institutional soap, meant for the guard showers. The barracks soap was lye-based and harsh. The guards got the good stuff, strongly scented and industrial. Tom checked the watchtower once more. Silence. He pulled his arm back, then tossed the bar of soap over the 10-foot fence. It hit the ground with a dull, unnatural clack on the hard dirt. Then, silence. Tom didn't wait. He just walked away, the blood rushing in his ears. He didn't know what he was doing, only that he was doing something that could get him written up, or worse, confirm his deepest fear, that he was starting to feel kinship with the enemy. Inside Barrack C, Yoko Harada lay on her cot, fighting the coughing fit. In the darkness, the small, clean bar of soap felt like a stone, cool against the cracked skin of her palm. She picked it up, lifting it to her nose. It smelled of perfume, wax, and chemicals. A clean, powerful scent that cut through the pervasive smell of stale sweat and thin mattress straw. It was a smell she hadn't encountered since 1943, when the last shipment of real civilian soap disappeared from Tokyo. This wasn't for prisoners. This was the enemy's luxury. Her first thought was, poison. It had to be. Why else would a guard, a demon who, according to her training films, should be bayoneting her, throw something so utterly extravagant to a captured nurse? They wanted her to feel hope, then take it away. They wanted to trick her into washing herself with a chemical that would burn her skin. They are weak, but sadistic. That was the central tenet of the imperial doctrine hammered into her. She clutched the bar, then slowly, deliberately, she lowered it and placed it carefully into her small cloth pouch, next to the small fountain pen she had carried since Manila. She wasn't going to use it, but she couldn't bring herself to throw it away either. It was an object that should not exist in her world, and its mere presence was a challenge. The next morning, Yoko was assigned to the laundry area near the main office, a punishment detail for a minor infraction. Corporal Tom was standing guard, reading a letter from home. He was young, just a boy really, with hair too light to be serious. She watched him, trying to find the monster, the sadist her propaganda had promised. She couldn't. He looked merely bored and hot. Suddenly, a commotion erupted. Ko, another prisoner from Barrack C, rushed past Yoko, her face pale. She grabbed Yoko's arm, pulling her into a tight, frantic whisper. "They are taking us to the Devil's Temple," Ko hissed in Japanese. "The supermarket. They say we can buy supplemental goods. It is a trick. They will show us what we cannot have, then starve us. They will laugh." Ko was repeating the official line, American sadism. She clung to the narrative because the alternative was unthinkable, that her empire had lied to her. Yoko nodded, but a tiny rebellious part of her mind, the part that still held the bar of scented soap, whispered, "Maybe they just want us to buy things." It was a terrifying thought. If they could buy things, it meant things existed. The truck ride to town was short, and brutal due to the heat. When they stopped, the engine died with a clatter, and the silence was heavy. They were outside a building with big glass windows and a neon sign that read, Piggly Wiggly. The women, including Yoko and Ko, stared out through the canvas flap. The automatic doors hissed open. a sound like a strange, welcoming snake. A blast of frigid, electrified air hit Yoko's face. It smelled of the outside, but amplified. Fresh dirt, cut flowers, and something intensely sugary. They were led inside. Ko immediately covered her eyes, mumbling prayers, convinced she was entering a trap. But Yoko's eyes were locked on a single display. It was a pyramid of oranges, perfect, gleaming, stacked so high they looked like a monument to an impossible, careless wealth. She counted the layers. She counted the types. 18 varieties of canned vegetables. Yoko could hear the low, mechanical hum of the refrigerators. It was the sound of a country that had so much electricity it could waste it on making milk cold in 3 different sizes of glass bottles. The very air they breathed inside the store was a testament to the colossal industrial power that her leaders had claimed was rotting. Her mind flashed back to Manila 3 months ago. The hospital, the stench of gangrene, the watery rice soup, the general telling them to fight to the death because America was starving. Yoko walked down the bread aisle, the smell of fresh yeast and wax paper making her dizzy. Ko, standing nearby, suddenly let out a small, strangled gasp. She wasn't looking at the oranges. She was looking at the meat counter. Behind thick glass, shielded by a sheet of cold, clean air, were cuts of meat. Thick, marbled steaks, whole chickens, and piles of cured bacon. They were displayed casually, as if meat were an ordinary thing. Ko started to hyperventilate. In Saipan, her brother had died, protecting a meager supply of canned sardines. Ho noi ho joy, Ko whispered in a broken, feverish voice, her eyes wide with a confusion more terrifying than pure fear. Ho noi ho nkeo. It was the first undeniable crack in the wall. The cognitive dissonance was physical, metallic, and sour on Yoko's tongue. But then her gaze fell on something smaller, something that made her heart seize up. A young American woman, a shopper, stood nearby. She paused, frowned at the cart, then reached in and pulled out a half-eaten loaf of white bread. She squeezed it, decided it was too soft, and tossed it into a wire basket labeled discard. Not spoiled, not moldy, too soft. Yoko stared at the discarded bread, a loaf that could feed her barracks for a week. Her hand, the one that held the pouch with the precious soap and pen, started to tremble. It wasn't the abundance that broke her, it was the waste. This was their true weapon. Not the bayonet, not the bomb, but the sheer, careless, unquestioning capacity for waste. Back in the barracks that evening, Yoko finally took out the bar of fragrant soap. She poured a small cup of water from her ration and began to wash the bar, not to use it, but to inspect it. Was it truly safe? Or was this a slow, psychological operation? She took out the fountain pen, the one she had promised to bring home to her sister, the one that smelled faintly of the expensive ink of the pre-war era. She opened her hidden diary, the small book of rice paper. She wrote slowly, the black ink stark against the thin, fibrous page. May 13th, 1945. They did not torture us today. They showed us the market. I saw enough food to feed a small army for a year. I saw a woman throw away bread because it was too soft. I do not know what is more frightening, their hatred, or this kind of terrible, effortless power. I do not know who I am anymore. Every time I touch this bar of soap, I remember the lie. And the lie is why my country is losing. A tiny drop of water, from the soap she was inspecting, fell onto the page, smearing the fresh ink. It was the first tear she had cried since her capture. Meanwhile, Corporal Tom was back on watch, staring at the dimly lit window of Barracks C. He knew she was awake. He knew she had the soap. He just didn't know that the single small bar of scented soap, a mundane luxury he took for granted, had just become the most dangerous truth the prisoner had ever encountered. He pulled out his own fountain pen to write a letter home, but stopped. He could feel the weight of the discarded bread that the prisoners had seen, and for the first time, he felt a sting of shame. His abundance was not virtue. It was the sheer brutal luck of having been born on the right side of the war. He put the pen down. He could not bring himself to write a word. He put the pen down. He could not bring himself to write a word. The next stage of the psychological warfare, as the Japanese women saw it, was the food itself. For breakfast, the aluminum trays held an abundance Yoko could not reconcile. fluffy, yellow scrambled eggs, real butter melting slowly into thick toast, and fresh cold milk. In Manila, the memory of real eggs was a distant theoretical concept. Here, it was ordinary prison fare. Yoko sat, her fork hovering over the plate. Her stomach, conditioned by months of starvation and thin rice gruel, churned with a mixture of desire and profound disgust. To eat this food was to admit the lie. To enjoy this food was to betray every starving soldier, every hungry civilian, every person who had died, believing America was weak. She watched Ko, who was struggling. Ko picked up a piece of the toast, squeezed it tight until the butter smeared her fingers, and then carefully dropped it on the floor. "The devil's food," Ko muttered, loud enough for Yoko to hear. "It will weaken your spirit." Yoko looked at the toast on the floor, the butter a luminous, scandalous yellow against the dull gray concrete. But then she looked at her eggs. She remembered her mother in Osaka, trading their few remaining silk garments for half a scoop of rancid vegetable substitute. She remembered the faces of the dying men in her field hospital, their eyes hollow, their bodies consuming themselves. They died for a lie. If the lie was what kept them alive, then perhaps the truth was what she owed them now. She picked up her fork. The egg was soft, rich, and intensely flavorful. The cold milk was thick on her tongue, leaving a fatty, clean coating. The sensation of abundance was an assault on her mind, but a desperate comfort to her starving body. She ate slowly, methodically, chewing each bite 20 times, savoring the richness. With every bite, the wall of propaganda in her mind didn't just crack, it began to crumble. This was not a nation struggling to keep up. This was a nation whose industrial base was so vast, it could feed its captured enemies better than the Imperial Army could feed its officers. The numbers she'd dismissed as insane exaggeration, 50,000 planes a year, suddenly sounded conservative. How could a nation this mighty in its ordinary life be defeated? The guilt, the intense corrosive guilt, was the bitter aftertaste of the butter. She was surviving on the fruits of the enemy's strength, a strength built on the very abundance her government had taught her to scorn. Later that week, Yoko was back in the storage area near the hospital wing, tasked with counting and organizing supplies. The silence there was often deeper than the barracks. That day, Corporal Tom was assigned the shift. He was sitting on a crate, meticulously cleaning the grime from his own leather boots. He looked up, nodding tersely. Yoko didn't meet his eyes, concentrating on the pile of freshly laundered uniforms. Then Tom broke the silence, not with a command, but a confession. "My brother Ray, he was in the Pacific. Saipan," Tom said, his voice flat. He kept polishing the boot, his eyes fixed on the leather. "He was killed about 6 months ago, before I got assigned here." Yoko stopped sorting the uniforms. The only sound was the soft shick-shick of Tom's polishing cloth. They told all of us, that the soldiers you fought alongside were animals, that they'd kill themselves rather than surrender," Tom continued, his voice barely audible. "And they did. Ray was with a unit clearing a cave. The last Japanese soldier inside detonated a grenade, took out 3 of our guys with him, including Ray." Yoko said nothing. She knew that soldier. She had seen men do that. It was the highest honor, the ultimate proof of loyalty. Tom looked up, his blue eyes searching hers. "But I don't see animals here. I see women who cough at night. I see women who weep when they see an orange." Yoko swallowed hard. She wanted to scream at him. "We did it for honor. We did it for the emperor." But the lie caught in her throat. She had wept for an orange. She opened her pouch, her fingers finding the familiar, hard casing of the fountain pen. It was the only tangible link to the past she had left, a gift from her late fiancé, a journalist who died in China, urging her to always record the truth. She took out the pen and placed it gently on the table between them. She knew Tom would report her for this. It could be used as evidence of an unauthorized item. Tom stopped polishing. He stared at the elegant, silver-banded pen. The pen wasn't American. It was German-made, the kind of expensive, high-quality pen that signaled a life of education, of civilization. Yoko spoke in a low, controlled Japanese, the language of her discipline. She pointed at the pen. "This wrote the truth," she said. Then she pointed at herself. Now, it records the lie. Tom didn't understand the words, but he understood the ritual. He understood the object's weight, its value, its meaning. He had seen the same type of pen in his own father's study. He looked back at her and then at the pen. He picked up his cleaning cloth and wiped the spot on the table where the pen had been. Then, without looking at her, he pushed the cloth toward the uniforms. "Clean those stains," he ordered, his voice suddenly sharp, American. He was giving her a command, but it was a quiet, desperate order for her to put the pen away, hide the truth, and stay alive. He chose to be the cold, obedient guard rather than the witness to her surrender. Yoko took the pen, the polished metal warm in her hand. She looked down at the uniforms, then back at Tom. They understood each other, across the vast chasm of their uniforms, the chain link, and the war. The cognitive dissonance was complete. Her enemy was protecting her right to write a lie about him. August 1945. The world was changing faster than the camp could keep up. Germany had surrendered. Rumors of a massive, terrifying new weapon called the atomic bomb floated through the guard barracks. Then came the news. Hiroshima. Yoko was helping the American doctor in the clinic when the announcement came over the radio. Ko, who had still clung to the notion that the Americans were lying about the supermarket and the eggs, screamed. She clawed at her face, her eyes wide with terror and disbelief. Yoko felt nothing. She had already been erased. The supermarket and the butter had killed her spirit months ago. She looked at the American doctor, a kind man who had treated her cough without judgment. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a horror that transcended the enemy-allied division. He wasn't celebrating. He looked sick. 3 days later, Nagasaki. The war was over. The women sat in silence. No one celebrated. They were going home, but home was ruined. Worse, home was built on a foundation of lies. Their beloved ones had died for nothing. In the days before repatriation, Corporal Tom was assigned a final task: help the prisoners send their belongings home. He found Yoko in the laundry room again, preparing her final bundle. She held the cloth pouch, her movements slow, deliberate. She took out the fountain pen, then the bar of scented soap. The soap was barely used, still fragrant. She looked at Tom, who was watching her from the doorway. She slowly unwrapped the bar and placed it on a windowsill, letting the Texan sunlight hit its wax surface. She was leaving the small, precious lie behind. Then she took out the object she had secretly held onto, the souvenir from the Piggly Wiggly trip, the one piece of evidence she intended to bring home. A single, small orange, now soft, slightly wrinkled, but still whole. She walked up to Tom. She didn't speak Japanese. She didn't speak English. She simply held the orange out to him. Tom looked at the fruit, then at her eyes. He had seen the terror that orange had caused. He understood. This wasn't a gift of gratitude. It was the burden of truth. She was forcing him to acknowledge the full weight of their victory. Tom reached into his own pocket and took out his personal fountain pen, the expensive one his father had sent him. He placed it next to the orange. He was trading the symbol of his truth-telling family for the symbol of her shattered reality. Tom simply said, "Good luck." Yoko nodded. She didn't take the orange back. She took the pen, the new one, the American one. She would write the new truth with it. Years later, Yoko Harada became a high school teacher in the newly rebuilt Tokyo. She taught history. She never spoke publicly about the prison camp, the eggs, or the supermarket. But on her desk, she kept a small wooden box. Inside was a piece of soap, carefully preserved, and next to it, 2 fountain pens. Her fiancé's old silver-banded pen, and a simpler, American-made pen, the kind a corporal might use. One day, a student asked her why she kept these strange items. Yoko smiled sadly. "The first pen," she said quietly, touching the old one, "wrote the story of the emperor, of honor and of sacrifice. It wrote the lie." She picked up the second pen, the American one, the one that smelled faintly of cheap oil and the industrial might of Texas. "This one," she whispered, her eyes far away, "this one wrote the truth. The hardest lesson of war is not knowing who your enemy is, but knowing who you are when the truth of your existence is built on the lie of your government." She paused, looking out the window at the bustling modern city. The most terrible lie of all is believing that silence is survival. That little American guard knew to keep silent was to be complicit. To write the truth, even in secret, was the only way to be free. Corporal Tom Hayes returned home to Oklahoma and became a school principal. He never told his students, his family, or his wife the story of the Japanese nurse and the supermarket. He didn't have to. One day he received a small package from Japan. Inside was his old silver-banded fountain pen. No note, just the pen. He knew who it was from. He held the pen, the symbol of his own quiet act of kindness and calculated disobedience. He had chosen to protect the truth, knowing it would hurt her more than any lie. The supermarket still stands in Segoville, Texas, now a modern chain store, its doors still opening automatically. Shoppers walk the aisles, ignoring the stacked oranges and the cold, abundant milk. They don't know that those ordinary aisles once defined the true scale of a war, not in bombs or in bullets, but in the simple, terrible arithmetic of eggs, butter, and a bar of soap. Yoko Harada died in 1998, never having returned to America. The orange had long since decomposed, but the truth it represented had become the central theme of her life. Honor is not in dying for a lie, but in living with the pain of the truth.